In this video, I'll be talking about the importance of framework for teams that are reading the criticism on the neg and ways that you can use framework as a negative critical team to better strategy against policy asks, diversify your strategy, and give yourself more 2-and-R options. So the first thing I want to talk about is the general structure of a framework argument for critical teams. You need an interpretation, which is a way of deciding how the debate should be evaluated or what types of evaluation for the debate should come first when the judge is making their decision. How you frame your interpretation is extremely important because it basically sets up a standard for what you need to do and on the criticism in order to win the debate. It sets the stakes for what each team needs to do in order to win and how each team interacts with their relationship to the ballot. And so your interpretation, the strongest ones that I know of are ones that focus on an epistemological framing of debate, one that focuses on the pedagogical values of debate, the things that we get from debating itself, and try to devalue the game values of debate that policy teams will offer. And a lot of policy frameworks, they center things like fairness, things like education, and the ability to have predictable clash. A lot of their arguments are about the way that critical forms of framing the debate basically require a meeting of the AF that make it impossible for them to debate on the merits of the outcome of the plan text. Your argument needs to decenter the focus on the plan text alone and needs to make an argument that forces them to defend the total values of the 1AC. The total values of the 1AC being evidence they read, the way that they debate, evidence they read after the 1AC, and things that are external to the plan text but are part of the way in which they go about their politics. The reason this is important is because making an interpretation that focuses on the pedagogical values of debate gives you a lot more room for the type of link arguments that you can make. And so by creating a framework argument that focuses on the 1AC or the AF as a totality, you give yourself as a neg team a lot more link arguments that you can read, which means that you have a lot more angles in which you can debate the affirmative. The second thing that you need when you're thinking about your interpretation is how you want to frame the win condition for that debate, what the negative team needs to do in order to win the debate. What do you need to disprove about the AF in order to win that the judge should vote negative? This could mean that your interpretation could do something like focusing on a difference between the plan and the alternative. If you want to win a really strong alternative argument, it could mean that if you win a link argument to the way that they incorporate certain types of pedagogy into that argument, that they should automatically lose. All these things change the types of parts of the K that you want to focus on and give your judge basically a top level insight into what types of arguments you're going to be making and which ones you're going to be focusing on, which can help craft a strategy for the rest of the round. The second argument that you need when you're making a favorite argument on the negative and reading the criticism is standards or reasons to prefer that interpretation. So which of these standards or interpretations look like? I think the best standards interpretations are ones that once again focus on the pedagogical value that we get from debate, things that are about how we produce knowledge and the type of research that we produce under the resolution, and why those things are particularly more important than the outcome of a plan. A lot of forms of critical framework indict the process of fiat or the idea that a plan will pass in order to basically set up a basis that lets us understand that the actual passage of the plan in terms of the ballot doesn't spill out to making out of round change. So it's only a question of the types of education that we produce in round. So sometimes these critiques of fiat, although maybe not round winning, can be useful in making distinctions between the types of values between your framework argument and their framework argument. And so in that sense, even if you don't go all in on these types of arguments, making key distinctions about why your type of framework is more valuable can still be really helpful. The second thing that you should be thinking about, besides just devaluing the game potential of their framework, is also winning arguments about why thinking from the theoretical perspective, from the criticism that you're reading, is beneficial. The framework argument gives you another space for you to extend some of the theories of power, the ways that you're thinking about the world structurally, into another portion of the flow in order to make arguments about why viewing the world through that perspective is critically key. If you're able to make arguments to your judge about why viewing the world from your theoretical perspective as a way to evaluate the debate before the actual parts of the debate start to happen, then you're already basically setting yourself up for a win because your framework argument is pushing the judge to think further towards your theoretical perspective. And so a lot of times the things that people are confused on is like, how do they make their standards that they're reading applicable to AF standards, and how should you be answering AF standards? So the first thing is that when you're thinking about how to answer AF standards, I think the first thing I always jump to are what are the ways that you can subsume the most offensive parts of their framework arguments, especially when they focus on more procedural types of arguments. A lot of times teams make arguments about why things like evaluating things outside of the plain text is unfair and unpredictable. And I think that there are a lot of good arguments to be made about why the ability to critique the 1AC in its entirety is the process of doing education and coming to knowledge about certain policies and the way that they inform us, because it forces us to do detailed reading through text and detailed research through the text that we're reading. And so thinking of ways that you can subsume their arguments and win that there are parts of their arguments that you may be able to value under your perspective, but that the way in which your offense comes across is more valuable in the context of the interpretation means that you can end up in a really offensive place in terms of their standards. Other arguments that you might want to be thinking of is just focusing a lot on being able to do impact comparison of framework debates. This is a place that I at least see, especially students at the high school level, lack a little bit. Impact arguments are extremely important at the framework debate because the better your impact is on the framework debate, the easier you can get to the judge valuing your theoretical perspective and understanding your interpretation and what is at stake when we think about the types of research that we take up in debate. Making arguments that center why certain types of research and debate are valuable and are not is an incredibly important process to come to a conclusion about what type of framework we should use to evaluate around. And so when you're thinking about how to make your best impact arguments, you should be making arguments about why there's something that happens to us subjectively as people when we make arguments about research, when we do and take up different types of research practices. Those change our theoretical perspectives in the way that we go about the world. Maybe it changes the way that we think of political methods and political ideologies. Maybe it asks us to be political agents in different ways. All these things are arguments that really matter in terms of why we do debate and answer critical questions about how judges should view the importance of your argument. So the last kind of thing that I've seen a lot of people ask about is like, how do you win on a strategy that is like mostly reliant on framework? What is like the value that framework should have and like how you're prioritizing other parts of the criticism? I think the answer to this is pretty contextual. I think it's a question of A, how you're most comfortable reading the criticism, and B, like what type of strategy you want to go with the criticism. If you think that a lot of your criticism, a lot of your link arguments are made directly off of the action of the plain text, that the plain text produces something that would be critiqued materially by the criticism, then the framework portion might not be as important for you because maybe you can win impacts that are comparable to the AF in the world where the judge still evaluates the plain text. And so this means that all you really need to be focusing on is more like the impact framing portion of the debate, which I've done another video on. The thing that I think makes a framework debate extremely important and possibly like round winning is that if you have arguments that are about specific things that happen throughout the debate, things that you want to force the app to defend pedagogically, like if you want to hold them to every piece of evidence that they read and you want to have that high ability to scrutinize the type of epistemology is offered and use it as a way to make your other arguments seem more appealing and lower the standard that you need to have for really having that specific link argument, then your framework argument can be a place where you're really setting precedents on like how specific and how good your link arguments need to be in order to win in routes to other portions of your offense into something that's comparable to the alternative. And so your framework argument can also set up a way in which you're able to answer things like permutations and offensively get rid of those arguments, because you can make arguments about why valuing the AF versus the alternative in a world where they cannot be combined and thinking about them as different political strategies can be helpful for how we think about how we plan real politics, right? And in that way, you can subsume a lot of the framework arguments that a policy team would normally make. And so you kind of have options on ways that you use framework, but it can be incredibly important in how you craft whatever strategy you end up making when thinking about ways to diversify the types of ways that you're reading critiques and to boost the strength of different parts of your criticism. Hopefully this is helpful. See you again.